Did you know that by the middle of 1969, the Federal Boys and the Biafran Boys were having wild parties at the front lines during the Nigerian Civil War? And watch this video to the very end and share this video so that other people will learn what you're about to learn now. Now, the year was 1969 and the Civil War was ongoing. And then the both sides has been having it out for almost 2 years. It all started when the Federal Boys started throwing gifts into no man's land. At first, the Federal Boys were tying, gifts of food, cigarettes, and then drinks and every other item that they could think of, and they would throw it into no man's land. The Biafran trenches are there, the Federal trenches are there. So when these gifts are in no man's land, at first, the Biafran boys will ignore the gifts because, this is your enemy and he's throwing gifts to you. It could be a Trojan gift. So, at first, the Biafran boys ignored it. But because these items were scarce, very, very scarce in Biafra at the time, no cigarettes, no food, no good clothing, no shoes, no nothing. And then the Federal boys are throwing in these gifts into no man's land. So, after some time, the Biafran boys started coming out of their trenches in the night to go into no man's land to pick those gifts. And then they see those gifts, they pick it, and those gifts were very good for them. The cigarettes, the food, the drinks, and all of it. And then very soon, they established a line of communication. The Biafran boys and the Federal boys established a line of communication through which they pass information to each other. And then after a while, they decided to have a party. Now, remember, the bulk of that battle and the conflict were fought on Biafran territory. So, the Federal boys agreed to do that party and the Biafran boys agreed to the party too. But then, the Federal boys can provide the food, the drink, and the music for the party. The Biafran boys were the ones that are going to provide the women. Okay? There is no complete party without women in it. Women. So this is what happened. And then they planned it, they planned the party, and on that fateful night, the Biafran boys, together with the women, came out of their trenches and got on the Federal troops' side. And then everyone came with their ammunitions, but the ammunitions were collected. Their pew-pews, everyone's pew-pew was collected and locked up. And then the wine flowed, the music flowed, and the food flowed, and everyone was having a wide party. The Biafran boys were on the Federal boys' side having a good party. And then apparently this was going on in different sectors during the Nigerian Civil War. After the party of that night, everything went smoothly, nothing happened, and then the ammunitions were their pew-pews were distributed back, and everyone went back to their own side. This party kept on happening at different places in the front lines. People went to party the first time, they went to the party the second time, they went to the party the third time, and then on this fateful night, as usual, the Biafran boys provided the women and they went to the party on the Federal side. The Federal side, as usual, provided the wine, the food, and the music. And then the party was going on. But on this very night, something was different. There were lots of food. There were lots of drinks. There were new music. The Biafran side has been fighting for a while. So the new albums, the new music that came out in the greater part of the last 2 years, they were not aware. And on this very night, these new songs were hitting the records and everyone was enjoying themselves. And then the Biafran boys had enough to eat, they had enough to drink, and there were so many women to enjoy. But then, at the end of this very day, the Federal troops rounded up all the Biafran boys and arrested all of them after the party. And then they were locked up in their guards' room together with their women. The women were separated, of course, and then they locked up the soldiers. You can't hold women for long. Those women were not soldiers. They were just civilians trying to have a good time and fend for themselves. And then one of the girls got out and got back on the Biafran side, and that was how the story went out, that the Biafran soldiers on the front lines, together with their counterparts, has been having wide parties on the front lines. When this news got to the GOC of the Biafran forces, He immediately went to the leader of Biafra and sought and obtained more ammunition from the leader of Biafra, and then he distributed it in the front lines, and he ordered all commanders in the front lines to launch an attack. And when this attack was launched, that's when he discovered that in one sector from the Biafran side, the commander in that sector has signed an agreement with the commander of the Federal Boys side in his own sector. This agreement that they signed implies that they are not going to fire at each other eventually when any of them launch an attack on the other person. And then when this attack was launched, the boys remained in their trenches and reportedly fired on the air to make believe as if something was going on. The attack was actually going on, whereas nothing was happening. And then when this news got to the Biafran GOC, he immediately removed the commanders of that sector on the Biafran side and replaced their commanders and relaunched the counterattack again. And that's how the partying that was going on in the front lines ended during the Nigerian-Biafran conflict. Know your history.